A brutal arrest in the dead of night. Two arrogant cops thought they were throwing just another helpless man into a cold concrete cell. They mocked him, stripped his dignity, and locked the door. They had absolutely no idea they had just handcuffed their own precinct's worst nightmare. The rain over the city was unrelenting, coming down in sheets that turned the asphalt into a slick black mirror. Late at night, Marcus Hale pulled the hood of his faded gray sweatshirt tighter around his head, keeping his head down against the biting wind. He had just finished a grueling workout at a 24-hour boxing gym a few blocks away. In his early 40s, Marcus was built like a heavyweight, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, and possessing a quiet, heavy stillness. But tonight, he was just a tired man walking home in the rain, carrying a worn duffel bag over one shoulder. He didn't notice the patrol cruiser until its high beams washed over him, casting his long, distorted shadow against the brick wall of a closed laundromat. The cruiser slowed to a crawl, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. Marcus kept walking, maintaining his steady, rhythmic pace. He knew the unwritten rules of the street. You don't run, you don't stop abruptly, and you don't put your hands in your pockets. A quick chirp of the police siren cut through the sound of the rain. The cruiser's passenger window rolled down. "Hey, stop walking!" A sharp nasal voice barked from the darkness of the car. Marcus stopped. He turned slowly, letting his duffel bag slide down to his side. He kept his hands completely visible, resting them on the strap of the bag. The cruiser's doors popped open, and two officers stepped out into the downpour. Officer Harlan Mercer was a young, wiry man with a tight buzz cut and a restless, aggressive energy. His partner, Officer Jasper Reed, was older, heavier, and looked thoroughly annoyed to be standing in the rain. "Where are you headed tonight?" Mercer demanded, shining a blinding high-lumen maglite directly into Marcus's eyes. "Home," Marcus replied calmly, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. He didn't squint or turn away from the harsh light. "Home where?" Mercer took a step closer, resting his right hand casually on the butt of his service weapon, a deliberate practice intimidation tactic. "About 4 blocks from here, over on Cedar," Marcus answered. "Put the bag on the ground," Reed ordered, walking around the rear of the cruiser to flank him. "What's in it?" "Gym clothes, a towel, boxing gloves," Marcus said, slowly lowering the bag to the wet sidewalk. "Officers, if I may ask, why am I being stopped?" Mercer scoffed, stepping into Marcus's personal space. The cop smelled of stale coffee, cheap cologne, and adrenaline. "You match the description of a suspect involved in a string of burglaries in this sector. Tall, dark clothing, carrying a bag. Now put your hands on the wall." Marcus didn't move immediately. His mind processed the tactical situation, the legal framework, and the blatant violation of protocol happening in real time. "Officer, a general description of dark clothing in the middle of a rainstorm does not constitute reasonable articulable suspicion for a Terry stop, let alone a search. Am I being detained?" Mercer's jaw clenched. The arrogance in the cop's eyes flared into sudden, violent anger. Cops like Mercer weren't used to citizens using terms like reasonable, articulable suspicion. To them, it wasn't a legal defense, it was a challenge to their authority. "Oh, we got a street lawyer here, Jasper," Mercer sneered. "I said put your hands on the damn wall." Without waiting for a response, Mercer lunged forward, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. Marcus's heavy boots remained planted. He barely moved backward, which only infuriated Mercer further. Reed rushed in, grabbing Marcus's left arm and twisting it violently behind his back. Stop resisting, Reed yelled, though Marcus hadn't flexed a single muscle in defiance. "I am not resisting," Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the agonizing pressure on his rotator cuff. "I am complying, but I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful detention." Mercer kicked Marcus's legs out from under him. The big man went down hard, his knees slamming into the wet, unforgiving concrete. Before Marcus could catch his breath, Mercer drove a heavy knee directly into his spine, pressing his face into a puddle on the sidewalk. The freezing water filled Marcus's mouth. Cold steel ratcheted tightly around his wrist, biting into the skin. "You have the right to remain silent, pal," Mercer whispered venomously into his ear. "I suggest you use it." They hauled him up by the handcuffs, nearly dislocating his shoulders, and threw him into the back of the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, enclosing him in the smell of old sweat and vinyl, Marcus sat upright. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply looked at the digital clock on the cruiser's dashboard and memorized the car number printed on the dash. "Unit 412. Up front, Mercer laughed as he tossed Marcus's duffel bag into the trunk. "Burglary tools," Mercer said to Reed as they got back into the front seats. "I felt a crowbar in there." "I only had boxing gear, Officer Mercer," Marcus spoke from the back, deliberately using the man's name. "And there is a dashboard camera in this vehicle, as well as the intersection camera at Harrison and 9th. Both will show a clear lack of probable cause." Mercer turned around, his eyes wide with a manic mix of amusement and rage. You think anyone gives a damn what you say? You're going to a cage, and tomorrow a public defender is going to plead you out to disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Enjoy the ride, counselor. Marcus leaned back against the hard plastic seat. He let the silence stretch out, accompanied only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers. Let them dig the hole, he thought to himself. Let them dig it as deep as they possibly can. Precinct 8 was a relic of the 1970s, a brutalist concrete structure that felt more like a bunker than a public service building. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing hum, illuminating a lobby packed with the weary dregs of the night shift. Mercer and Reed marched Marcus through the double doors, frog marching him past a row of holding benches. A few other officers looked up, nodded at Mercer, and went back to their paperwork. Nobody asked why a man in gym clothes was bleeding from a scrape on his cheek. Nobody questioned the excessive force. Systemic apathy hung in the air like thick smoke. They reached the booking desk manned by Sergeant Elias Crow, an older man with tired eyes and a drooping gray mustache. "What do we got, Mercer?" Crow asked, barely looking up from his computer monitor. "Prowler, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct," Mercer rattled off seamlessly, reciting the lie with practiced ease. "Refused to ID on the street." "Empty your pockets," Crow ordered. Reed roughly unzipped Marcus's hoodie and patted him down, pulling out a soaked leather wallet, a set of keys, and a cell phone. Reed tossed them into a plastic gray bin on the counter. Mercer snatched the wallet and flipped it open, pulling out the driver's license. He didn't look at the credentials behind it. He didn't notice the metallic gold card tucked in the inner sleeve. He just read the front of the license. "Marcus Hale," Mercer read aloud, tossing the license back into the bin. "Well, Marcus, you're spending the night in the honeymoon suite. Let's go." They didn't process his fingerprints right away. They didn't allow him his legally mandated phone call. The blatant violations were piling up so fast that Marcus was categorizing them in his head like a grocery list. Violation of department policy, failure to process property correctly, denial of legal counsel. Mercer grabbed him by the elbow and shoved him down a narrow, heavily scuffed hallway. They reached holding cell C, a 10 by 10 iron cage that reeked of urine and industrial bleach. Mercer unlocked the cuffs, shoved Marcus inside, and slammed the heavy iron bars shut. The metallic clang echoed down the corridor. "Breakfast is at 6, Mercer grinned, tapping his baton against the bars. "Sleep tight." Marcus stood in the center of the cell. He didn't massage his bruised wrists. He walked over to the thin metal bench bolted to the cinder block wall and sat down. Across from him in the corner, a man was sleeping off a heavy bout of intoxication, snoring loudly. The night dragged on. For hours, Marcus sat perfectly still in the dim light. He didn't sleep. He watched the officers walk past the cell block. He listened to their conversations. He listened to how they spoke to the inmates and to each other. He observed Sergeant Crow sleeping at the booking desk. He noted the times the patrol officers failed to do their mandatory welfare checks on the holding cells. By early morning, the adrenaline of the arrest had faded, leaving a dull, throbbing pain in his shoulders and knees. But his mind was razor sharp. He had spent the last 2 decades building cases, dismantling corrupt organizations, and holding the powerful accountable. He knew how the machinery of the law worked from the street level all the way to the governor's mansion. He had seen bad cops before, but to experience it firsthand, to feel the sheer suffocating helplessness that ordinary citizens felt when stripped of their rights, it ignited a cold, focused fury deep within his chest. Early in the morning, the precinct began to stir. The night shift was exhausted and irritable. The morning shift was filtering in, carrying steaming cups of coffee and shaking off the rain, which had finally stopped. A short time later, the heavy steel door at the end of the cell block swung open. Footsteps echoed rapidly down the hall, sharp, authoritative clicks of high heels on the linoleum, accompanied by the heavier, hesitant boots of Sergeant Crow. "I demand you open that cell immediately, Sergeant," a crisp, commanding female voice echoed. Mercer, who was lingering near the coffee machine at the end of the hall, stepped forward. Whoa, lady, you can't be back here. Who are you?" Elena Voss stopped in front of holding cell C. She was dressed in an impeccable charcoal pinstripe suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. She was a high-powered attorney, and her icy glare could freeze water. "I am this man's legal counsel," Elena said, turning her piercing gaze on Mercer. "And you are Officer Harlan Mercer, badge number 8492, is that correct?" Mercer narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, that's me. Your client is a violent prowler, counselor. He's not going anywhere until his arraignment." Elena didn't even blink. She turned to Sergeant Crow, holding up a piece of paper bearing a judge's official seal. "This is an emergency writ of habeas corpus signed 10 minutes ago by Superior Court Judge Thomas Avery. The charges have been dropped entirely. Release my client immediately or you will all be held in contempt of court." Crow looked at the paper, his face turning pale. He didn't argue. He fumbled with his keys, walked past a stunned Mercer, and unlocked the heavy iron door of cell C. Marcus stood up slowly. He smoothed out the wrinkles in his damp hoodie and walked out of the cell. He didn't look angry. He looked completely terrifyingly in control. You think you're pretty smart getting a hotshot lawyer? Mercer sneered, stepping in front of Marcus to block his path. You're just delaying the inevitable, Hale. I know your face now. Next time I see you on my streets, it won't just be a night in a cell. Marcus stopped. He looked down at the young officer, his dark eyes locking onto Mercer's. No, Officer Mercer, Marcus said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. Next time you see me, you will be the one needing a lawyer. Marcus stepped around the cop and walked out into the lobby. Elena handed him a heavy plastic bag containing his personal effects. Are you all right, Marcus? She asked softly as they walked through the double doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool morning air. I'm fine, Elena, Marcus said, pulling his cell phone from the bag and powering it on. But this precinct is sick. It's rotten to the studs. Mercer's just a symptom. The mayor's office has been calling since early this morning, Elena noted, opening the door of a waiting black SUV. They are panicking. Cancel the press event, Marcus said, sliding into the leather seat of the SUV. There was a freshly pressed, custom-tailored navy blue suit waiting for him on the back seat. Call Commissioner Langford, tell him I'm skipping the ceremony and assuming my duties effectively immediately. Marcus looked out the tinted window, staring back at the gray concrete bunker of Precinct 8 as the SUV pulled away from the curb. Tell the commissioner I'm coming to work, Marcus said, dialing a number on his phone, and tell him to bring a lot of handcuffs. By mid-morning, the sun had finally broken through the lingering storm clouds, casting a bright, unforgiving light over the steel and glass facade of Central Police Headquarters. On the 14th floor, Commissioner Victor Langford paced nervously behind his massive mahogany desk. Langford was a seasoned politician in a uniform, a man who survived by keeping scandals out of the headlines. Today, the headline had just walked into his office. The heavy oak doors swung open. Marcus Hale stepped inside. The damp, battered gray sweatshirt was gone. In its place was a flawlessly tailored charcoal navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a crimson silk tie. The brutal scrapes on his wrists were hidden beneath immaculate French cuffs. Only the small dark bruise on his cheekbone hinted at the violence of the previous night. He carried himself with the heavy, undeniable gravity of a man who owned the room the second he entered it. Marcus, Commissioner Langford breathed, rushing forward with his hand extended. My God, the mayor called me at dawn. I am profoundly, deeply sorry about what happened at the 8th Precinct. It is an absolute embarrassment to the badge. Marcus did not take the offered hand. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes locking onto the commissioner. Langford slowly lowered his hand, clearing his throat awkwardly. An embarrassment implies a mistake, Victor, Marcus said, his deep voice smooth but carrying the lethal edge of a razor. What happened last night was not a mistake. It was a well-rehearsed, systemic operation of abuse. Those officers didn't hesitate. They didn't worry about cameras, protocol, or consequences. That tells me they have done it 100 times before. I assure you they will be suspended immediately pending a full review, Langford stammered, retreating behind his desk. They won't be suspended, Marcus corrected him, walking over to the window and looking down at the sprawling city. They will be indicted, and I am not waiting for a review board to tell me what I already know. Marcus turned around, his gaze piercing. For the past decade and a half, Marcus Hale had been the most feared federal civil rights prosecutor on the East Coast. He had dismantled corrupt narcotics units and indicted entire precinct commands. The mayor had spent months begging him to return to Belmont to take over the deeply troubled Internal Affairs Bureau. Marcus had finally agreed, demanding absolute autonomy. His official swearing in as the chief of Internal Affairs was supposed to be a polite, televised ceremony. The press conference is canceled, Marcus stated. I am assuming command of IAB right now. Where is my team? 10 minutes later, Marcus stood at the head of a sprawling conference table in the IAB war room. Gathered around him were the 12 hand-picked investigators of the Special Investigations Unit. At his immediate right was Captain Sophia Lang, a fiercely intelligent former homicide detective with a reputation for being incorruptible. To his left was Lieutenant Marcus Reed, an expert in forensic data auditing. Good morning, Marcus said, his voice commanding absolute silence. As of this moment, I am your chief. We are not going to waste time with introductions. We have an active, escalating crisis at the 8th Precinct. He pressed a button on a remote, and the massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It displayed the dash cam footage from Unit 412, synchronized with the intersection traffic cameras. Last night, this man was unlawfully detained, assaulted, and falsely arrested by Officer Harlan Mercer and Officer Jasper Reed, Marcus explained. Reed squinted at the screen. Chief, respectfully, that's you. Yes, it is, Lieutenant, Marcus replied coldly, which means we have absolute, unassailable first-hand witness testimony to pair with the digital forensics. Watch the screen. The room watched in heavy silence as the footage played. They saw Marcus walking calmly. They saw Mercer initiate the stop without reasonable suspicion. They heard the audio clear as day as Mercer mocked him, shoved him, and drove a knee into his spine, while Marcus offered zero physical resistance. Captain Lang's jaw tightened. Textbook excessive force, no probable cause. They didn't even run your name through the database before they put hands on you. It gets worse, Marcus said, fast-forwarding the timeline to the precinct lobby cameras. Observe the booking process. Sergeant Elias Crow is the desk officer. Notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't log your personal effects into the secure digital ledger. Lieutenant Reed noted, furiously typing on his laptop. He doesn't initiate a medical evaluation despite the visible facial laceration, and wow, they completely bypassed the fingerprinting station. They just threw you in a cage because they were lazy and because they believed they were untouchable, Marcus said, leaning over the table. They thought I was just a ghost in the system and nobody. They could break to meet a quota or feed their egos. Marcus pulled a stack of heavily redacted files from his briefcase and tossed them onto the center of the table. I spent the hours between 1 and 6 this morning observing the cell block, Marcus continued. I noted severe dereliction of duty across the board, missed welfare checks, falsified logbooks. I want a full audit of Precinct 8's arrest records for the last 3 years. Cross-reference every arrest made by Mercer and Reed where the sole charges were resisting arrest and disorderly conduct with no underlying felony. I guarantee you will find a mountain of false arrests just like mine. Captain Lang looked up, a fierce, predatory smile forming on her lips. We are going to gut that precinct, Chief. We are going to perform surgery, Marcus corrected, his eyes locking onto the frozen image of Mercer's arrogant face on the screen. Surgical, precise, and devastating. He turned to the whiteboard and wrote out the immediate charges with rapid, aggressive strokes of a dry erase marker. Warrants to be executed, Marcus said. Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. State Penal Code 118, Perjury, filing a false police report. State Penal Code 245, Aggravated Assault by a Peace Officer. State Penal Code 236, False Imprisonment. Lang, get the district attorney to sign off on these warrants immediately, Marcus ordered. Reed, gear up. We are going for a ride. By mid-morning, the atmosphere inside the 8th precinct was thick with the usual morning chaos. Telephones rang incessantly, civilians argued at the front desk, officers milled about the bullpen, swapping stories and clutching cheap foam cups of coffee. Officer Harlan Mercer sat at his desk, his boots kicked up on a stack of incident reports. He was bragging to a rookie cop about how he had handled a street brawler the night before. Across from him, Officer Jasper Reed was slowly typing out the fabricated arrest narrative for Marcus Hale, struggling to make the timeline sound plausible. Just say he took a fighting stance, Jasper, Mercer laughed, tossing a crumpled piece of paper at his partner. It ain't rocket science. Public defender is going to plead it down by noon anyway. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the bullpen swung open. Captain Everett Kane, the commanding officer of Precinct 8, stepped out of his office. Kane looked physically ill. His face was ashen, and he was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Mercer, Reed, Kane called out, his voice cracking slightly. My office, right now. Mercer smirked, swinging his legs off the desk. Probably want to give us a commendation for getting a prowler off the street. Reed, come on. The two officers swaggered across the bullpen, oblivious to the sudden suffocating silence that had fallen over the older, more experienced sergeants in the room. They stepped into Captain Kane's office, Mercer leading the way with a cocky grin. What's up, Cap? Mercer asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. The door slammed shut behind them. Captain Sophia Lang stood there, her badge prominent on her belt, her hand resting near her sidearm. Lieutenant Marcus Reed stepped out from the corner of the room, holding a thick manila folder. Mercer's grin faltered. Whoa, ILB, what's going on here, Captain? Captain Kane didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, looking like a man attending a funeral. The high-backed leather chair behind the captain's desk slowly swiveled around. Marcus Hale sat there. He was perfectly framed by the morning light streaming through the blinds. He looked immaculate in his navy suit, his hands folded neatly on the desk. He looked at Mercer with a cold, terrifying serenity. Mercer physically recoiled. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Reed let out a strangled, breathless gasp, taking a panicked step backward until his shoulder hit the heavy oak door. Good morning, Officer Mercer, Marcus said, his voice echoing in the small office like the tolling of a bell. Officer Reed, you were the guy, Mercer stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, trying to reconcile the heavily bruised man in the wet hoodie with the impeccably dressed Titan sitting behind his captain's desk. I am Marcus Hale, Marcus said slowly, standing up to his full imposing height, Chief of the Internal Affairs Bureau, and as I recall you promised me that the next time I saw you on your streets, it wouldn't just be a night in a cell. Marcus pressed a button on a small digital recorder on the desk. Mercer's own venomous, sneering voice filled the silent room. You think you're pretty smart getting a hotshot lawyer? You're just delaying the inevitable, Hale. I know your face now. Next time I see you on my streets, it won't just be a night in a cell. Marcus clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. You were right, Harlan, Marcus said softly, leaning in so only Mercer could hear. It won't be just a night, it will be years. Marcus stepped back and nodded to Captain Lang. Harlan Mercer, Jasper Reed, Lang said, stepping forward with her handcuffs drawn. You are under arrest for aggravated assault, filing a false police report, and deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting around Mercer's wrists sounded exactly like the cuffs he had slapped on Marcus 12 hours earlier, but this time it was the sound of justice snapping shut. Reed secured Reed, who was openly weeping. Strip them of their badges, their weapons, and their union cards, Marcus ordered, not taking his eyes off Mercer, and walk them out through the front doors. I want every single officer in this bullpen to see exactly what happens to those who desecrate the shield. As Lang and Reed marched the disgraced, handcuffed officers out of the office and into the shocked silence of the precinct bullpen, Marcus turned to Captain Kane. Sergeant Crow is suspended without pay as of this second, Marcus commanded. I have 40 IAB auditors moving into this precinct in 20 minutes. Every arrest, every report, every piece of evidence logged in this building for the last 3 years is going under a microscope. If you have any rot in your house, Captain, I will find it and I will burn it out. Marcus didn't wait for an answer. He walked out of the office, his footsteps echoing with absolute authority. He walked straight through the bullpen, parting the sea of stunned police officers. He pushed open the heavy front doors of the 8th precinct and stepped out into the bright, clear morning. The rain was gone. The storm was over. But for the corrupt cops of Belmont, the real hurricane had just made landfall. Did the look on Mercer's face when the chair swiveled around make your jaw drop? If you felt the incredible rush of justice when Marcus turned the tables on those corrupt bullies, smash that like button. Share this incredible story of a brilliant mastermind taking down the system from the inside. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more thrilling real-life justice stories. Drop a comment below. What was the most satisfying moment of Marcus's revenge for you?